Welcome to the Team Teach podcast. I'm Claire, and in each episode you'll find me talking with an expert guest to learn more about behaviour. We squeeze a lot into each episode. You'll listen to the latest thinking in behaviour, continue your professional development with our book recommendation, and then I'll send you away with 3 practical tips you can use in your setting. I'm joined today by Dave Smallwood. Dave is a Principal Team Teach trainer and Company Director of Sense Training and Consultancy. He's worked in special schools for both the local authority and for the National Autistic Society. As a staff development coordinator for the National Autistic Society, he's also delivered and developed training in autism, equality, diversity and rights. Dave is also an occasional co-host of the Team Teach podcast. And today, Dave and I are talking about uniform at school and the impact on behaviour. Enjoy the episode. Hi, Dave. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Claire. How are you?
I'm very well. I think it's a feature of the episodes we do together. We've already had an argument off air about the topic, not a serious argument, listeners, but just, should we call it a heated disagreement about our opinions on it? I guess
a healthy debate.
A healthy debate, similar but different, which will make for an interesting episode, I think. But if you could just start off, Dave, by just giving a quick intro to yourself and what you do.
Yeah, I'm Dave. I'm a principal trainer for Team Teach, and I deliver the Team Teach packages. My experience is really working with individuals that have a formal diagnosis of autism in education.
Thanks, Dave. And my name's Clare Edmondson. I'm also a Principal Team Teach tutor. You'll recognise my voice because I host most of these podcasts. My background's quite varied. I've worked in mainstream services, SEN, autism, mental health, hospitals, alternative provisions and pupil referral units. So quite a spectrum. And actually that's really helpful, I think, for the topic today when we're thinking about uniform and behaviour. Because I've worked across the spectrum, I found it quite interesting thinking about this, of my different experiences working in different services. But we do like to start off with our reflective question.
Okay, Claire, I'm going to ask you the question. What do you wish you knew then that you know now?
Right, about the topic. So I was really reflecting on this morning, and I think I didn't get it. When I first started teaching uniform, I was just like, I think I was about 23, 24. And I was like, this is so pointless. Why do children need uniform? This is so boring, having to tell kids to take jumpers off. And I absolutely was quite renegade about it and would just, I'd do it to the level where it was acceptable with the behaviour policy. But it was, I hated doing it because I just didn't see the point of it. So I guess, having moved across different services, I did work in one school where I got it. I kind of twigged and I understood where uniform can be a helpful tool in creating a sense of belonging in a school. And it was one in Tottenham. And the kids were encouraged to take pride in the uniform that they wore. They had different coloured ties that related to the different houses, so they had a sense of belonging there. There was different badges and things that they could put onto their blazers to create a sense of belonging with different groups that they were part of. And it was really well done. And if people were challenging about uniform, it was all centred around this value of, we take pride in our uniform because we care about our school and we care about our community. I do think that might be few and far between, maybe, and that might be quite a special example. I don't know, but that did, and I do kind of wish that I'd known that in my first school when I first started teaching. That I think from that experience that it does have some benefit to foster a sense of belonging if it's done well, if it's done flexibly, and if it's done inclusively. So yeah, that was my one.
Yeah. It's such a lovely example, and I think it's really good. It's good that school has been flexible and used the uniform really well and inventive with it. I think maybe the issues occur when we're so rigid and we're so focused on uniform, and it's difficult to give advice to professionals on that, because that's such a good way of doing it. It's hard, but when you're working in a school and you have to follow behaviour policy, difficult to be inventive, isn't it? And It's a hard, it's a hard thing to do. So any head teachers that are out there that fancy changing the policy, then I think Claire, that example is brilliant, and maybe we should think about that.
I think it is, isn't it, that I do think that some of the behavioural difficulties that staff will face with uniform is the perhaps the pushback from children and young people. And I think when we're thinking about this topic, although primary services do have some uniform that's often quite simple, isn't it? Just a polo shirt and trousers or shorts. I think the pushback isn't so much there, and I think primary schools tend to be quite a bit more flexible with that. But we are probably thinking more about secondary services that tend to have stricter kind of versions of uniform. But I do think the pushback comes from the way that we try and address uniforms not being part of policy. And also, I think we face problems where staff can be incredibly inconsistent. And I've happily admitted when I first started teaching, I think almost purposefully, like renegade Clare was just like, nah, I'm not doing that. And I worked in an all girls school as well. And I just, staff would have rulers like measuring how long the girls' skirts were. And I was just like, I just want to teach. I just literally want to teach. But I do think with more experience in different services, I do kind of get some of that fostering a sense of belonging. But equally, I can see how it can waste so much time and cause so many behavior difficulties as well.
It can. And I was saying to you earlier that I tried to do some reading, and I wanted to find some pros of wearing school uniform. I wanted to look at the positive aspects, because I do admit that I have some difficulties understanding it, and I know the age-old arguments, and I've read them. But there is one. I'll find it now, and I'll just read you the sentence.
Mm-hmm.
It's about fairness, really. By bringing in a uniform, I'm not going to tell you the source of this, but it's just something I read. By bringing in a uniform, schools can avoid complicated issues around modesty, offensive symbols, and text, and remove any need for teachers to monitor what children are wearing against dress code. And I understand that, but now it's become something else. We teachers are still monitoring dress code, and now it's become a behaviour. So when we're thinking about how uniform affects behaviour, actually, we quite possibly have made a rod for our own back, because we're so rigid on school uniform and how it should be worn. Then we become so focused on it that it becomes a behaviour, and it becomes a behavioural issue. It's a difficult one, though, isn't it? How do we make adjustments in our mind? I don't think that we should have free for all. So everybody wears whatever they want for school, because
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna have some issues, you are, but all of these issues could be within a dress code policy. I mean, sixth forms, and you don't, the sixth formers, they'll have a dress code, won't they? Where they
Yeah.
go to school, they won't have to wear uniform necessarily, but they'll have to have some kind of dress code. So we could fall in with that a little bit, and remove a little bit of the behavioural issues around it. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do. I think, I guess the issue is, particularly when we're thinking about secondary, is that you've got teenagers going through puberty, and in their very biology of becoming more independent from adults, essentially, and trying to find their own identity. There's quite a sense of playfulness around identity and trying to find out where they fit and what they like. So I think even with a with a dress code, you still get that bite back, and it still becomes a question of how we can challenge some of the choices that the kids are making or the young people are making in a way where it isn't causing behavior difficulties. And I think your suggestion suggested it would be more flexible, a dress code, but essentially a uniform is a form of dress code, right?
Mhm.
And I think actually what we're discussing are very similar things. And I think too much flexibility means that it can be perceived as very inconsistent, but then too much rigidity can mean that it causes like huge behavior difficulties. I don't know. I guess the podcast episode isn't a question about whether we should or shouldn't have uniforms, because unanimously, really, across the country, uniforms are implemented. And I did think it was interesting when we did some research on this from the Education Endowment Fund about uniform, that there isn't actually any strong evidence that implementing uniforms improves behaviour. And I'm sure that previously, I don't know if you thought this, I thought there was evidence that uniform improves behaviour, and that's why everyone was doing it. But the evidence I had a quick look through is more that it could help behaviour and learning, but it's very hard to prove that just by having a uniform, it's suddenly going to improve behaviour. It has to be a whole host of things to, foster a sense of belonging, give people voice, like all the usual things we think about behaviour. But I did think that was really interesting, that there isn't any solid evidence that actually having a uniform improves behaviour. I don't know what you thought of that.
Oh, I thought the same thing, because you see it repeatedly. Actually, there's no strong evidence. You see that quite a lot when you're looking into this. I did find some from America actually that did suggest that it does improve behaviour. In schools where there is no school uniform, and there's increased waiting times for teachers, and people turn up late. Absences go up. But I don't know how convincing the research is on that.
Yeah.
There's not a lot of convincing research, really. I think it's something that we should talk about and should think about, because it's probably it's still in from a bygone era. Now we should research it, because there might be a lot of benefits from it, but it'd be really good to have some real strong evidence-based research on it. I would think. What I do want to talk about, though, because it is in our system, we have to follow behaviour policies, and we have to follow dress code and uniform policies and everything. But what I do want to say is we should be flexible, because there are going to be children with specific needs in your setting and in your school where we're going to have to make reasonable adjustments. So if we're rigid and too rigid on the behaviour policy, then we might be starting to work against education healthcare plans and such like, because of children with sensory needs and such like.
Yeah, that's so true, Dave. I know in the service I work in now, which is an autistic school, that there obviously reasonable adjustments to uniform are made, and some of the young people I work with have quite heightened sensory processing, and certain materials can escalate and dysregulate. So it's very flexible. It's just, choosing the right coloured top in the right material for that individual. And staff don't challenge uniform in the way that I've experienced and witnessed and done myself in mainstream school. It's more about the positives, like encouraging the kids to wear it, to create that sense of belonging. But I think you're absolutely right. The flexibility of approach is so important. But I guess the counter argument to that, I love a counter argument, Dave, is that if we're too flexible, then we will get behaviours, because the children and young people will see us as inherently inconsistent. What do you reckon?
No.
Dave hates me right now.
If you want to go into the consistency and fairness and things like that, then we can. Firstly, education healthcare plans are statutory documents and should inform our practice. And we don't want to be unnecessarily discriminating against disabilities. So we need to make reasonable adjustments for certain individuals. We can't treat everybody the same all of the time, because people are different. So we need to appreciate those differences. Now, what we have sometimes as staff is that real concern that if I make a reasonable adjustment for these individuals here, then we're going to have a real struggle with everybody else. So then what do we do? How do we balance that out? Do we say no to the people with actual needs and documented and stated needs to benefit that of everybody else? Or do we make the reasonable adjustments and explain to everybody and educate them? I think we need to. I think we need to make those reasonable adjustments. It's not unfair, and I very rarely have I ever experienced that massive cascade effect and the domino effect across a whole school just because we've made a reasonable adjustment for 3 individuals. People are people, and people will understand. Yes, you will get pushback from certain people, but that's something that we can manage and we can educate people on. But we need to have that flexibility, and we need to make reasonable adjustments for certain individuals. That's my answer.
Yeah, no, I think that's great, and particularly for those children and young people that have identifiable needs and written down needs, might be on their SEN register or have EHC educational healthcare plans in place, statutory documents. I think those reasonable adjustments are, well, I was about to say are great. That's probably not the right way of phrasing it. Are actually mandatory to make. But I'm just thinking about some staff working in schools where actually some individuals are perhaps not needing adjustments based on need, but trying to make adjustments to their own uniform to foster a sense of unique teenage identity, or to push boundaries, or to look like, I don't know, a popular person in school. So where we get the kind of more teenage boundary pushing behaviors, what then?
I it's hard to sit on the fence, really, isn't it? But I want to. I mean, should we be stopping children from expressing themselves and finding their uniqueness? I don't know. But we're going to find it, aren't we? And they're going to do it. The school uniform is now a vehicle for expressing ourselves. Or I'll just roll up my skirt a little bit, or I'll get my trousers just one size too big so they're a little bit baggy. I'll start untucking.
You're so out of fashion. It's tighter now, Dave, I think.
Well, I don't know. Oh no, but you're going to get that, and it's a difficult balance, isn't it? I've been there. I can think of instances of where it's happened, but that, it's a hard one to answer.
I know, I can see like Dave is really struggling with this topic because it's quite obvious to the listener and to me that Dave is like, we shouldn't have uniforms, they're the worst, like get rid of them, overhaul the system, down with uniforms. But luckily for the listener and for the staff that have to work in schools where there is uniforms, I'm much more in the middle. And I think
Well, which adjustments to the school uniform are the ones that we don't like? Which ones are they? Are they the ones that I personally don't like, or is it the ones that I don't know? It's a real difficult one. It's dress code, isn't it? If we have a dress code.
It is dress code, and I think really what we're talking about though is that so let's say, for example, I'm a member of staff working in a secondary provision, which I have, you know, on many occasions. I might want to change the policy, right? And I might not agree with it. So I will go down my usual lines to try and implement some change. But when I'm in it and the policy's there, I need to be showing consistency and I need to be implementing it. But I think for those listening, when we're in that position, we don't necessarily agree with all of the policy, but we still want to implement it. It's how you implement it that becomes really important. So where we're talking about identity expression, so I can use an example. I think my niece like dyed her hair blonde, and I think that's right on the cusp of not being okay. I don't even understand like the different policies of what people can do, but the way you'd want that challenged is a private conversation. I understand that you want to express yourself, that kind of language, acknowledging the intent behind it, and not going in with this hard line of like, you need to leave my classroom because you've got I don't know, your tie the wrong way round, or, whatever the code is. But just saying quietly, like, I can see that you haven't got your uniform the right way round. We all have to stick to this policy that's in place. And we use words like we. And so you're kind of partially agreeing with the policy. And I have found, when I've worked in schools where I have had to implement the behaviour policy, doing it in that way, you don't want to feel that you're going against your own values, but you're implementing in a flexible way the policy. I don't know. That's how I see it. I think that there is a way of doing it where you're not distracting from the learning. You're not creating this massive like pushback.
But the argument would be, we are, like with the hair. There's two arguments, isn't there? When you mention about hair, it's she's dyed her hair blonde, but people who are blonde are allowed blonde hair, but we're not allowed to dye our hair blonde and be blonde. Why not? But then our policy says that you can't have your hair dyed, and then we're going to start having people with green hair and purple hair. And there's arguments of why wouldn't we? But if that's what our policy says, then that's what we go with. But if in those circumstances, Claire, it wouldn't be you need to leave my class because your uniform's not right. That would be you need to leave the school until your hair's back to its normal color, or usual color, I should say.
Yeah, no, I do. Yeah, I know some schools might go down that kind of zero tolerance policy, compliance, etc. And if I'm the teacher in the classroom, that's really hard because I want that child in, right, to increase their learning and focus on their learning. So that would be deeply frustrating for me as a practitioner. But I suppose that's why advocating in our schools where we can for changes in the policy, because ultimately that example where a school says, nah, you can't come back, that's head teachers, you're seeing a management team. And if I'm the person working in the classroom, then what can I do about that? The only thing we can do is kind of advocate for changes. And I think that's really difficult to work in a system. And if I'm brutally honest, not the main reason, but one of the reasons that I ended up starting to work in specialist provisions was because I just couldn't authentically be on board with this idea of challenging, what young people and children wore all the time, as well as lots of other things around the education system in mainstream. So for me, I've just, it didn't always align with my values, and I had to make choices based on that. But yeah.
But for me, I mean, we talk a lot on team teach courses with staff about certain vulnerabilities that staff might face, and a lot of it's around the physical aspects that we do have in team teach, and people being concerned. But another concern for me is if I'm asking a child to leave my classroom because their uniform's not right, where would I stand legally on that? Because they have a statutory right to an education, and can I take that right away from them just because the shoes aren't right? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I know lots of the services I've worked in would have spare shoes and things that you could get from reception, and a whole bank of them, that the ones that are a bit more flexible in approach and kind of can preempt that might be an issue. So you have spare sets and a kind of a backup plan around it. But it becomes like almost farcical, doesn't it? That someone is spending half an hour to go and get the proper pair of shoes, whereas actually the half an hour could have been spent learning or playing or whatever it is that individual's doing. So yeah. I am conscious of time, Dave. We just need to do our top tip. Should I go first?
Yeah. Well, can I go first and try and nick one of yours?
Yeah, you go first. You go first.
Uniforms are here. Policies are in place, so we should follow the policies that the school has in. But if the school can think about it and adopt not a flexible approach, but like you were saying earlier about creating that sense of community within the school, and having like slight changes to uniform for certain houses and stuff. I really like that idea, and I think that'd be a good one to bring in. That's it. That's my top tip.
Thanks, Dave. And then another top tip from me is actually around, if a a child or young person isn't following the uniform policy, about trying to support that and speak to the child or young person kind of quietly, one-to-one. It's not about a battle. It's not about compliance. It's just about trying to remind them of the rule around it, and kind of taking it away from being a me versus you, but just being that this is the school policy, and I know we all have to follow it. I know that's difficult. I have to follow a dress code as a teacher, and kind of just that empathetic approach, because I think if we are too me versus you and using uniform as some form as kind of compliance, that's where the difficulties with behaviour arise. So that empathetic and positive behaviour approach to addressing behaviour, not behaviour, kind of uniform, I was going to say breaches. It's really getting into it. And then
in all
lastly,
fairness, just on that, in all fairness, in my experience, the staff across the country where I deliver training and go in and support schools, they are very good with that. I've got to say, they are very good with that. And they are too.
I think a member of staff really sticks out if that's kind of not the approach to it. Although and I've seen it in the morning where someone arrives in, and the first thing that's spoken to them is, where's your tie, blazer, whatever. And that's not the point of the school uniform, to have this compliant and kind of nagging thing as soon as you come in, like, hi, would be a first port of call. So I do agree, but I think just making sure that that's nice and tightened up. And then the last tip really is about those reasonable adjustments that Dave made, and flexible approaches, but making sure that where we do have individuals that are really struggling with aspects of the uniform, perhaps for sensory needs, that we are able to have a flexible approach to it, because that could really help someone. And having a scratchy uniform or scratchy material could actually be blocking someone's ability to be able to concentrate and learn. So understanding that and creating some reasonable adjustments, I think, is a great tip. So that's us, Dave. That was interesting. That was a good one.
It was. I could have gone on for ages.
But you could go on for ages, but that's enough now. So
Yeah,
we're gonna go. Thanks so much for your time, Dave.
We'll start again.
Yeah.
Bye. Bye, Claire.
Bye. See you later.
You've been listening to the Team Teach podcast. It's been great to have you here with us as we discuss behaviour, communication, and the ways we can best support those in our care. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.